As you know, my specialism has been, professionally so to speak, sort of research-wise, decision-making in uncertainty. And our experience is that at least much of the information that we receive continually through the day is sort of uncertain in as regards its validity. But we still have to make decisions. If we make no decision, it's a decision by default. We're, in a sense, taking what comes. If we do act, then we've made the decision. And we suspect that we've made the decision on uncertain grounds, but what we hope to be for the best, the most reliable, the best from the point of view of bringing about what we value. And that's really all we can say. This is how we live in this universe, as far as we know. You could say there's a certain uncertainty about this statement. Yes, could well be. Even if it is absolutely true, well, given the chaos we sort of live in, so to speak, we're not clear about that. So to us it's uncertain. How do we therefore make decisions given this porridge of uncertainty that we're moving about in? Well, we do what we think might be best. We don't know. Whether it's believing Jesus ever existed, for instance, or whether God exists, or whether the government is in fact the government at all, or some other power is. Everything, the news we hear, the things people tell us, even the things we remember. There's an uncertainty, is it, that this is what happened or what I've added to and redressed and believe what happened now. There's, in a sense, a case for that possibly being true, and therefore there is a measure of uncertainty about it, whatever the it is. In other words, it seems, in uncertainty, that we are forced to fall back on what we choose to trust, what we choose to assume is the case. Well, that might be that, the bit of news we're hearing is true, and we act accordingly. It might be what I think I remember is the case, is true, and choose to act accordingly. Or it may be that I think there's sufficient uncertainty, possibility, that I choose to act according to that uncertainty. There is then, in a sense, no apparent way round living in a world of what we choose to trust, because we can't choose to live in a world of what we know, because there's always a possibility that we've got it wrong and we don't know. You can say, oh, well, there are some things extremely unlikely, so we choose to believe that they're true. Yes, true. But we still choose to believe it, and there is still a measure of uncertainty from our ignorance point of view. Trust, then, is the order of the day. Whether you act or whether you don't act, if you choose not to act, it's because you trust in the uncertainty that you're not sure how to make a good decision and choose to make no decision. It's still an act of trust. If we live then in a world of trust, what's the best way of living in a world of trust? Does it help if we trust the worst and live accordingly? Typically not. It means such a suffocation of life, such a restriction, because it's such a dangerous world, that we're not living at all. So we may well find that that is not optimal. It's optimal to trust certain things. So we now look at it from the point of view of what seems to be optimal to trust. What have I trusted in the past that turns out pretty well, as far as I know, compared to what doesn't? If I trust that you're my enemy, I act accordingly. Mobilize my forces and my defense and my caution and my lack of cooperation. And this may result in quite a starved sort of existence on my part, because I feel it's necessary to defend myself against the possibility of you being dangerous. That may be such a miserable existence is not a good choice to take, even if that's what tends to happen. I may find that trusting your friend, behaving accordingly, being cooperative, actually seems, in uncertainty, to bring cooperation and good behaviour back, and a much greater, if you like, measure of freedom, happiness, and peace. So I live in a world not so much of understanding in that sense, but what seems to work. And really, we've always thought like that. We look at something and we think, well, there seems to be a relationship between, for instance, putting more and more heat into this liquid and it turning into a vapor. And I have a theory now about the energy makes the molecules vibrate so much that they lift off from the surface. And that is the steam or the vapor. I never 100% know the theory is true. It's just that it's a working hypothesis that has brought some success in the past. So it becomes part of my itinerary of things that I trust will happen. Then I find in a situation of, for instance, tremendous pressures, that putting more and more heat in doesn't result in it evaporating. It still stays as a liquid. Ooh. Must be something to do with the pressure, says he in uncertainty. It tends to always happen when the pressure's high. So I start to have some notion that, well, presumably the pressure stops the molecules lifting off from the surface. Do you see? But it's all what we choose to trust and believe. And some things we trust seem to be very successful, and we continue trusting. Newton's laws seem to be extremely reliable, apparently now with the frontier of science being down to sort of nanotechnology understanding and so on, atomic physics and so forth. We're not so sure as the rule can be applied here. It's not familiar territory, and things seem to be behaving contrary to what we expect. Oh, that's interesting. We're faced with rather more uncertainty in this field than we expected. We're not trusting that Newton's laws hold up at the minute. Something else seems to be going on. Well, that's the sort of world we seem to be living in. It is possible that Jesus did exist and that the story as recounted in the Gospels, for instance, is absolutely true, factually, about a man called Jesus who lived accordingly to the Gospel. It's unlikely in the light of most of what's in the Gospel can be traced back to similar stories or legends or beliefs of other previous religions and so forth. The wisdom is not new. It seems to be of old, sometimes even almost verbatim, like now we see darkly, St. Paul's thing echoing the sort of situation that Plato is recounting. We may see all sorts of inconsistencies in the Gospel and in Plato's writing. So we wonder if we're really being told the truth. And of course there will always be that possibility. It's just that we may look at it and judge it to be overwhelming. But we'll still not be sure. A person suddenly conveniently dies in the news and you think, oh, that's an interesting coincidence. But that's all you can make of it. You don't know. It may have been that the car got out of control and the chap died, or the plane dropped out of the air and this key person just happened to be in it, and now we'll never know. And the uncertainty persists. Of course, many of the uncertainties and the things that present or semi-present are not too vital to our immediate welfare and life concerns, so it's not that we dismiss them, we just don't have the time to deal with them further, and even if we do put time to it, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of progress as regards whether we're getting more sure or less sure, or it's not beneficial, so we don't do it. We optimize. We allocate our attention according to some optimizing feeling, really, as to what's bringing us the most benefit and what's the most pressing in our circumstances, which is not actually what's in the news or what's going on at work. It's whether we've got enough food and warmth and protection, and whether we're being appreciated, and whether we're overall happy or unhappy, in pain or not in pain. We have a priority ranking which starves out being desperately concerned about a whole background of things we feel pretty sure we're not sure of. Thank you, Dad. I maintain, because it seems to be the best thing in practice to believe, is that this is not a problem but a blessing. That the uncertainty is there because of our benevolent God, who's giving us a freedom to be what we want to be, choose what we want to believe, and even live to some extent according to that, namely our values, and to learn and find out the consequence of such choice of trust. And my hope, and I mean that, my hope is that such is, in some sense, beneficial, necessary to our life eternal, to be safe in the kingdom of heaven, in God's family, so to speak. And I don't mean I know this exists, this family. I mean I choose to think it could do, and if it does, what would be reasonable? What would the role of uncertainty be? It is to give us a freedom here in a school called this universe of uncertainty, in which we can find the outcome of the beliefs, the fundamental values that we have, and by such experience and learning, modify them such that they are appropriate to an eternal life in a possibility of heaven. I then find that, very simplistically, thinking this way is very beneficial. I get happy, a happy response, outcome, life, joy, the days of pleasure. It's beneficial. In other words, I'm finding a reward for this sort of trust and belief. Now, I then think to myself, well, how do I want to live in this state of such reward and benefit, or not? Oh, well, that's pretty straightforward. By definition, obviously, I want that which I value, which is joy and peace and happiness and meaning to life and freedom from pain, and this choice of belief seems to be associated with gaining such. I don't know it's true. I can imagine situations in which it doesn't, but it doesn't seem to be a good consequence to spend too much time imagining such exceptions. In other words, what I'm thinking, what I'm imagining, and what I'm trusting most certainly seems to affect, I say most certainly, uncertainly in fact, but does seem to be associated with that which I value: happiness, joy, relief, calmness, assurance, peace, love, interaction, fellowship. It might be material gain too, some prosperity and security and provision. So get out of my way. This is what I'm going to do, aren't I? Do you see? I find a great desire to trust accordingly. So I do. Now you could find some that way down the track, but it has this problem. Oh, didn't expect that. Now my concern and values might shift and change. Of course. And it's meant to. So that we're constantly adjusting, homing and honing in on what seems to be the most reliable, best things to trust. I have to trust. Even if I do nothing, I have to sort of, in some sense, trust that that's safer than doing something. I have no option but to trust. So the question seems to be in uncertainty that it's best to choose what seems to be most reliable in bringing what I feel and seem to think that I value, and adjusting such according to the consequence. I think I've said enough words. I've sort of thrown a storm of words and it's flowed off like nothing on earth. 20 minutes have passed by in what seems to be but a few moments to me. I think I'll leave it there and think about it and listen to this recording. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.